I missed actually the intro. So obviously I'm Collin, Dixon.
Yeah, I'm Dixon.
What was it that actually brought you here?
I've just heard people mention street epistemology in discussions, and then I saw someone mention it again the other day. So I Googled Street Epistemology Utah, and
Oh, cool.
Here I are.
That's great. Well, it seems like you generally try to think about things more and kind of more philosophically minded to begin with.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. I think that's most people in this group, but I always love meeting other people that have that, where they actually do want to kind of analyze it. So you had a belief today that we were going to kind of examine.
Yeah.
What was your belief? And then let's kind of narrow it down to like a specific claim about that belief afterwards.
Human civilization is in a process of irreversible collapse.
Okay, so human civilization is in a process of irreversible collapse. When you say collapse, what do you mean by that? Is it just everyone's dead at the end, or just some of us?
So it's almost certain that humanity will almost go extinct. The definition of collapse I use is roughly a sudden reduction in complexity.
Okay, so so you said extinct though. So just to make sure, do you mean that humans will also go extinct, or just that we'll become less complex?
I think that we will become much less complex, and because of the situation we're in, we'll go extinct. However, I also think extinction was inevitable, as it effectively all species that have ever existed have gone extinct.
Interesting.
So,
have you always felt like we were? I'm going to use a different word, doomed, that we were going to end up collapsing?
No.
What was it that kind of changed your mind to where you started feeling that way?
I went to Iraq with my Marine Reserve Unit in 2009 and had a lot of time to read while I was there. And the things I was reading in combination with what I was looking at gave me a real bad feeling about things. And I've spent my time since then fact-checking myself, I guess. So I grew up like a lot of people around here, Mormon. Mm-hmm. So there's an element of being doomed in that, but in kind of a millenarian sense where everything's going to turn out well eventually. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't consider that believing that we're doomed. Though I'm not going to say that doesn't inform my psychology and why I'm obsessed with thinking about this.
Well, that's actually kind of one of my next questions is, so do you think if you didn't have that, if you weren't over in Iraq and if you just read those same books and had your same history, do you think you would still have that belief?
I think it's very possible because it's becoming a very common belief. I think a lot of people are coming to that conclusion because of personal experiences they're having and things they're seeing in the world. I didn't know how to articulate it when I started feeling bad about things, but I knew that what I was seeing was unsustainable, and that I didn't like the experience for humans that our civilization was producing, right? Some people have those same experiences in radically different situations and become activists or whatever. I kind of am also probably, but I think not a very social person. So my response to it was to read a lot and read books about the collapses of past civilizations. And so to get back to your question, I think it's likely that I would have some version of that belief, but I think it's likely that I would not have gone in depth on the evidence-based side of it.
Okay. Were there any books that you read that had a hopeful view of the future for humanity?
Yeah, lots of them. Of course, I can't think of any of them right now. So the guy who wrote the book, I was lucky enough to take a class from and spend some time talking to. He wrote a book called The Collapse of Complex Societies that came out in '88. His name's Joseph Tainter. And he when I was in his class, at some point I made the offhand comment that I'm one of those near-term human extinction people, near-term on the order of centuries, right? Hopefully. And he said, I hope you're wrong, right? Because his book really kind of examines past civilizations that have collapsed, like the late Bronze Age civilization, or Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, as most people know it, or the Roman Empire. I try to stay away from that one because if people bring up Rome, usually there's some fascism about to come onto the table. And the book it's not a doomer book, right? It's not, there's no millenarian, the end is nigh. It's just considering the dynamics of things. And we came out of those civilizations. So I would consider that a hopeful version of the evidence-based side of things. I've also spent a lot of time, this isn't a book, but I spent time working with a nonprofit whose goal was to develop open source hardware. And in order to sequester carbon and build resilient, sustainable communities, right? So I've read a lot of books adjacent to that are hopeful. So yeah, I can give you a reading list in a couple days if you want.
Oh man, I am so backlogged on books. Thank you for the offer. When you were, it sounds like, and correct me if I misheard you, but it sounds like you have read both books that have an idea of a more negative outcome for humanity and civilization, but you've also read some books that have a more hopeful opportunity for humanity and civilization. What is it that made you seem to go and possibly give more weight to the books that said we're doomed versus the books that said that there's hope?
I think it is largely a personal impulse to give weight to the kind of science education I've had, where the primary thing that makes me think this is energy use, right? And looking at, so just to give a hugely oversimplified version of things, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we were using coal, right? And then we started using oil, and at that period, you could burn 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrels of oil, generally, right? And that enabled us to expand the human enterprise to a great degree, right? But as we've and there's people make arguments that the reason that now the energy return on energy invested is lower, where it's maybe 3-to-1 by some estimates, is because of political machinations or under exploration of new deposits. My reading suggests to me that we've picked all the low-hanging fruit. And our civilization is extremely complex and has a lot of specialization, right? So if you went back to even as recent as the 1500s and you polled lots of people, what is your occupation, there would be a good basket full. Whereas now, I mean, there's an endless list of different things that people do, right?
We now have TikTok influencers, so
right.
You've got
Well, and there's new things coming on the table all the time, and those require a lot of energy, a lot of cheap, easy, free energy, right?
Real quick, so because it seems like you spend a lot of time researching things in the realm of science, is there any energy technologies that you've seen that we could possibly discover before that extinction that you think would sufficiently be capable of preventing the extinction?
Preventing near-term extinction or extinction altogether?
Either one.
So extinction altogether, I don't see how that's possible, because at some point we would speciate, just like every species does. we evolved from species that are extinct, but we're still here. But we couldn't breed with those previous species, using that as one of, there's other ways to differentiate species, but just for the sake of conversation.
And actually, I probably should have asked this definition a little earlier. So would you count then a next evolutionary form of human, maybe
like a transhuman kind of situation?
200, 300,000, a million years from now, if we evolved into a different form, let's say I have a great 100,000 generations down grandchild, would you consider that an extinction of humanity if it was an evolutionary form, or would that still be able to classify it under humanity for you?
Again, that's kind of depends on how you define species, right? Even if that happened, and whatever scientists at the time considered that a separate species and humans to be extinct, I would consider that an unrelated phenomena to the collapse extinction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, I forgot where we're at with that.
No, that's good. So kind of going back to that idea of whether or not is there anything that you've seen in your scientific research for a new technology that might be able to counteract the negative effects that would cause extinction?
This is a catch-22. So the most promising thing is fusion, right? Most of the renewable technologies kind of require degrowth to work, and it doesn't seem like that's ever happened intentionally. In that book, one of the case studies is the Eastern Roman Empire, where they decentralized and decomplexified as a result of it. Mm-hmm. And the Eastern Roman Empire existed for another 1,000 years, I think. But it doesn't seem like they got together and said, hey, we got to do this, right? So I'm really skeptical that we'll be able to make the renewable transition. I'm doing the solar panels, compost, all of the things that go along with that socially.
Good for you.
I'm fine with, I think they're great. But things like fusion, it's been 10 years out since my dad was my age, right? And it would take 30 years to build a viable fusion reactor, and we're running into some real big problems that might prevent us being able to run a fusion reactor, right?
If we were able to get an up and running fusion reactor, do you think that would have a chance of preventing extinction?
No, because I think that would enable the human enterprise to expand even more. And then even if we're not polluting with CO2, we're still having a larger footprint on the biosphere. We're still replacing more wild animals with domesticated livestock, probably. Maybe everyone decides to go vegan. So I think it might just change the specifics of the problem we have, and we're still going to run into a lot of the same problems.
Do you think there's any combination, perhaps, of the technology of fusion reduction changes that humanity can make? Maybe even there's been talk about expanding to other planets in the future. Do you think there's any sort of combination where we could, to quote the Martian, science the shit out of this and be able to prevent our extinction?
I think we would have to make some deep and profound social changes that would probably look more like mysticism, which is actually why I'm deeply interested in mysticism. It would be like fundamental social technologies that require valuing future generations in ways that only some cultures on the planet do, that we've tried our hardest as a civilization to exterminate. So I think those things are possible. I don't think they're likely, and I'm trying to work out the particulars of them, and it's pretty dicey.
Well, but in that dicey sphere, would it theoretically be possible? Is there any sort of chance, or are we kind of like at a 100% ranking of this is definitely going to happen, or do we maybe have like a 99.9% but a 0.1% chance?
It's a hard. I don't know how to make a real assessment of that. Mm-hmm. Because I have such limited knowledge, and we do as a civilization. The way I approach it is that I act as if we have a 100% chance of collapsing and a 100% chance of fixing it, even though they're diametrically opposed. Yeah, thanks for letting me talk about that.
No, yeah.
There's nothing
No,
I've
that's
ever
great, yeah.
wanted to be more wrong about, so I always like talking to people about it who try and question it, but usually it's a lot more vitriolic. So.
So just to understand this, you're saying that, and I know it's done, but out of curiosity,
Yeah.
what will trigger it is energy needs? Is that what's going to trigger the rapid decline?
Kind of. That's a way to think about it. I think it's so
Is it like global warming? There's a lot of issues.
accustomed to an availability of energy that will not.
yeah. Complexity has energy maintenance costs that we won't be able to meet, and then that doesn't result in everyone going like, oh, I guess we're not doing that anymore. It's like catastrophic. You know, the late Bronze Age resulted in cities being razed to the ground. People forgot how to write for hundreds of years. You know, it was.
Yeah, I hope people have learned not to cut the last tree of the island, because that's kind of what you're worrying about, right?
Yeah.
We need trees, so we're gonna cut all of these trees, and then at the end there's no trees now.
And there's no other islands to go to either because we can't get to Mars anytime soon.
Well, and
So-
I just want to say,
I learned about that.
I really liked at the end when you said that, I act as if there is no, or, I act both based off of there's hope and no hope. So it's moving you to action. That's really awesome. And I appreciate now, especially why when you said, I have this, my claim and my belief is that it's this way. It's because it's something that is motivating you to act and to try to make sure that it doesn't happen. So I really appreciate that.
I mean, I can't really do anything about it. So, but
So a lot of small pieces.
yeah.
One person